The Donetsk Fortress Belt looms. Russia knows that it has to throw everything that it has at the most fearsome defenses that Ukraine has ever created. That's what Putin has ordered. It isn't working. The more Russia tries, the harder it fails, and Putin's Donbass disaster has proven it. What was meant to be the offensive that ended the war has led to Russia losing it all, as Ukraine is setting the stage for the total liberation of the Donbass in the future. And we see it all playing out in the battlefield maths. Let's talk territory. Russia did terribly on that front in April, as it continued a trend that we've been seeing since the winter of last year. According to the Institute for the Study of War, or ISW, Russia's forces experienced a net loss of 116.01 square kilometers in April, with the caveat that this figure doesn't include areas into which very small units of Russian troops may have infiltrated. Those areas are grey zones that neither Russia nor Ukraine truly controls, though Russia will tell you that a single soldier setting foot in a settlement is enough for that settlement to be claimed. This net loss is the largest that Russia has experienced since August 2024, and it comes on the back of several months of dwindling returns that have seen Russia trading more soldiers than ever for lost territory. In March, Russia just about managed a net gain of 23.04 square kilometers, says the ISW. That's slow enough to be stagnant. February saw a gain of 122.73 square kilometers, which came on the back of a January where Russia gained 318.54 square kilometers. Add up the figures and you get Russia gaining just 348.3 square kilometers of Ukraine in 4 months. That's a ridiculously low number, and it shows us that Putin is in the midst of a Donbass disaster. You see, 2026 was supposed to be the year that Donbass finally fell to Russian pressure. That's what Russia was desperate for you to believe, and the Kremlin even went so far as to tell Ukraine that it needed to pull its troops out of the Donbass by the end of May, or Ukraine would feel the full wrath of the Russian army. That wrath translates to barely any territory gained for tens of thousands of soldiers being lost every month. But still, Putin insists on pushing for the Donbass. He has even set a new deadline for the capture of the Donbass, September 2026. That simply isn't going to happen. The maths doesn't add up, and you'll learn why later. Still, the all-out campaign has been launched by Russia as the spring offensive is underway and looks set to carry on into the summer. Slovyansk is the main target in the Donbass, as it's a key link in the Donetsk Fortress Belt that is giving Russia so much trouble right now. But to see how intent Putin is on seeing his will carried out, we only need to look at the assault figures for the week leading up to April 27th. That particular week saw the largest number of combat clashes recorded in the Ukraine war for the previous 2 months. In the Pokrovsk sector of the Donbass, there were 305 assaults. The Hulya-Pola sector faced 147 attacks. And on it goes all over Ukraine, but primarily focused on the Donbass, to add up to 1,384 assaults across a single week, or an average of almost 198 per day. What Putin believes is that the scaling up of its assaults showcases the overwhelming strength of the Russian military. But this 2-month high in attack numbers happened during the very same month when Russia recorded its first net losses in almost 2 years. That's more revealing than Putin wants you to know, because it shows that Donbass, and particularly the Donetsk Fortress Belt, are far tougher to crack than Russia realized. Russia continues to prioritize the capture of Donetsk. If it's able to reach that oblast's administrative border, the Donbass is all but Russia's to control. But we've been saying that for 4 years, which is the entire point. Putin's forces still haven't reached that border. The fortress belt still stands in their way, just as it has since the invasion started. And the progress on the ground is so glacial that it's starting to make Russia realize that it will cost far more than it's worth to take Donetsk by force. Donetsk isn't on the verge of collapse, and the Kremlin knows it. Part of the reason for Russia's slow progress, beyond Ukraine's battlefield maths that we'll be getting to soon, is that Russia is splitting its focus all across Donetsk. Advances, though minor, are being made, even though Ukraine is cancelling out those gains with the liberation of territory elsewhere. Euromaidan press reports that Russia has achieved a little success in the Kramatorsk-Slovyansk region, where it's captured a handful of small villages. The canal near Chaziv Yar has also been crossed, which will allow Russia to create some flanking pressure elsewhere. And in Konstantinivka, which is west of Chaziv Yar, Russian forces are simply trying to bypass the settlement from the northeast, while they place pressure on Kramatorsk from the southeast. At least these are the plans. But despite small gains being made, none of what Russia wants to achieve in Donetsk is coming to fruition. The problem that Russia faces is that it's spreading itself too thin as it tries to take the rest of Donetsk. That may seem like a strange claim to make, given that there are only 6,000 square kilometers or so of Donetsk left to take. But a combination of the sheer scale of death Russia experiences in Donetsk, combined with the collapse of its plans elsewhere, leads it into having to launch full-on assaults against settlements it's trying to bypass, as we now see in Konstantinivka tells the story. Ukrainian military analyst Konstantin Mashevets explains what we're now seeing in this particular sector. As a result of Russia's failure to bypass, Russia's 8th Combined Arms Army and 3rd Army Corps now have to break through toward Konstantinivka via the short route, essentially head-on, literally covering its southern and southeastern approaches with the bodies of their assault infantry. This is slow, exhausting, and above all, extremely bloody and costly, Mashevets says. That sums up Russia's Donbass situation nicely. All of Putin's best plans are being laid to waste on a battlefield that isn't playing out the way that he needs it to, for any of the dramatic Donbass deadlines that he has set to look anything close to what can be achieved in reality. In this situation, 6,000 square kilometers start to feel like 600,000, as Russia's forces are forced to grind away at defenses that inflict casualties on a massive scale. Ukraine has also been making it difficult for Russia to focus its efforts on advances from the Pokrovsk direction. After around 2 years of brutal fighting, Russia finally managed to claim the Pokrovsk city center in January, followed by the northern portion of the city in March. Ukraine made Russia scrap for every single inch. According to Ukraine's 7th Rapid Response Corps of the Air Assault Forces, Russia lost 15,000 soldiers in the 6 months up to February 13th across the core sector of defense in the region alone. Add the many other sectors of defense Ukraine has set up, and you see that even as Pokrovsk was on the verge of falling, Russia was burning through thousands of troops. Russia's plan now is to push forward from Pokrovsk and onto Belitska, which lies just south of Dobropilya. The goal is then to use Dobropilya as another lever that Russia can use to flank the Kramatorsk-Sloviansk region from the west. But Ukraine has been thwarting Russia's plans there, just as it has elsewhere in the Donbass. Ukraine's February counteroffensive, which saw it reclaim over 400 square kilometers of territory in its southern regions from Russia, was really all about Donetsk. Russia wanted to hold on to territory in the south to create a buffer zone that would block Ukraine from sending soldiers into Donetsk. When that territory fell back into Ukraine's hands, Russia was forced to send reserves that were meant to be available for the fight in the Pokrovsk sector and elsewhere to the south. No reserves means slower progress, and that's what we're seeing all across the Donetsk front. Again, the math shows it. The intensity and number of assaults are rising, but territorial gains that Putin would expect to see in return are nowhere to be found. The best that Russia has managed is the capture of a handful of villages as it fails to flank. But here is where the situation for Putin's patsies in the Donbass gets serious. Ukraine is making Russia pay such an enormous price for almost no gains that Donetsk is starting to look like a death trap for Russia's soldiers. That changes everything about the battlefield maths to come. But before we get into that, you are watching The Military Show. If you're getting insight from our channel, remember to subscribe so that you never miss any of our analysis. Ukraine has responded to Russia's renewed push in Donetsk with the best possible defense: drones. So many of them, in fact, that Ukraine has pulled a long way ahead of Russia when it comes to the number of drones that it's deploying on the front lines. According to the deputy head of the President's Office of Ukraine, Brigadier General Pavlo Palisa, Ukraine is now at the point where it's using 30% more strike drones than Russia across multiple sectors of the front, including in Donetsk. Palisa compares this situation to the one in Kursk, where Ukraine counter-invaded in August 2024 to create the last month where Russia saw a net loss of territory, to what we see now. Back then, Russia was well ahead of Ukraine on the strike drone front, and still Ukraine managed to push past the border and into Russia itself. Now Ukraine is the one that has leapt ahead, albeit not across every sector of the front. It's not only about quantity but also quality. It must be said honestly that the quality is on par with the enemy, as they are also improving their systems, but we have made a very significant leap, Palisa said in early April. This shift into Ukraine's favor on the strike drone front is being confirmed by Russian military bloggers who are reporting the same thing, Euromaidan Press says. And it's here where we start to see Ukraine's plan for the defense of the Donbass really start to take form. Ukraine's goal now is to use its drones to increase pressure on Russia's ground forces in any way that they can, and the best way to do that is to widen the war as much as possible. In other words, this isn't about the fight on the front anymore. Ukraine's task is to make its drone-infested kill zones so massive that most of Russia's soldiers die before they ever get a glimpse of the Fortress Belt. The emergence of middle-range drones that Ukraine can use to strike into the Russian rear in the occupied territories enhances this strategy, as it cripples the support network that Russia needs to maintain to make any sort of real forward progress in Donetsk. This is how Ukraine sets the stage for a pushback in the Donbass. It forces Russia to batter its own forces during useless assaults that never get past the kill zones, thus creating an attritional campaign that weakens the Russian offensive with each attack that's attempted. The idea is to create the situation that we discussed right at the beginning of the video. The more Russia tries, the harder it fails. And even though failure can still lead to some territorial gains for Russia, as we're seeing in some sectors of Donetsk, the returns diminish each month, and the cost of making those returns cripples Russia. Does that sound like an unrealistic plan? If so, we only need to look at the losses that Russia is experiencing to see why Ukraine coming out on top in terms of drone maths is key to the defense and then liberation of the Donbass. Between December 2025 and April 2026, Russia lost 156,735 soldiers. These are confirmed losses, by the way, not estimated. Every single soldier that fell in the name of Putin's ambition was tracked and logged by Ukraine's Army of Drones system, and there will likely be several thousand more that can be added to this number in terms of untracked deaths. Russia isn't recruiting what it needs to recruit to make up the shortfall, as it's over 8,000 soldiers short of covering its losses in the 5 months noted. But the bigger issue is what this scale of death means for Russia in places like the Donbass. Remember, Russia is intensifying its assaults across Donetsk. That sort of thing is only possible when you're able to maintain a massive ground force for the assaults. Russia losing more soldiers than it recruits, whether those losses take place in the Donbass or not, has an overall weakening effect. If the trend continues, what we'll start to see is Russia going one of two ways. Either the pace of its assaults slow down as Russia tries to maintain the size of its units, which inevitably leads to fewer gains, or Russia tries to maintain the pace of its assaults, but it uses smaller units to do so, thus weakening the assaults and leading to more deaths. Either approach spells bad news for Putin in the Donbass, and it's not like things are going particularly well there anyway. Russia has about 6,000 square kilometers of Donetsk left to capture before it can claim that it holds the Donbass. Though not all of the casualties we've seen over the last few months are concentrated in Donetsk, there are enough happening there to give us an indication of just how much Russia will have to sacrifice to fulfill Putin's ambition. On April 8th, United 24 media reported on comments made by Palisa, who revealed that Russian forces are now losing 316 soldiers per square kilometer captured in Donetsk. That's just under twice as many soldiers as it was losing for the same gains during the same period last year, and it makes for some terrible Donbass maths for Putin. If that horrendous casualty rate is maintained, it means that Putin will have to send 1.896 million of Russia's soldiers to death or serious injury before the Donbass falls. That's over 500,000 soldiers more than Russia's total casualty rate for the entire war so far, and it shows us that the Donbass is a death trap for Putin's forces even when they're making gains. Of course, this is conditional on Ukraine maintaining the 316 soldiers per square kilometer casualty rate. That's far from a given. But in essence, what all of this means is that Russia has trapped itself into a corner. Tie these losses to the higher assault tempo and you see that Russia is using more of its soldiers to buy less land in the Donbass region than ever before. Though Russia is still able to exert pressure, it can't do so across the entire Donetsk front. Again, it's spreading its forces and its drones too thin at a time when Ukraine has a 1.3 to 1 drone advantage. What ends up happening is that Russia's assault is fractured. The attempts to flank fail, as we're seeing, and Ukraine can continue to make gains elsewhere that slow Russia down in the Donbass. Now let's look at the best-case scenario for Russia. That would be that Donetsk falls and the Donbass falls under Russia's control. According to Palisa in statements made at the beginning of March, Russia would need a year and a half to make that happen at the rate of advance that we saw in January and February. That already means that Putin's September 2026 target is done and dusted, which is a win for Ukraine in and of itself. Whenever Putin claims that something is going to happen and it doesn't, that's a shot against Russia's chances of convincing the West that Ukraine should simply cede the Donbass. Another caveat to Palisa's comments is that they were made on March 1st, when Russia was moving forward in Donetsk at a faster pace. A year and a half looks downright ambitious to take the Donbass now, especially if Ukraine can maintain and build upon the sheer number of casualties that it's inflicting on Russia. And there are the casualties to come. They may not end up numbering 1.8 million plus, but it's almost certain that Russia will have to trade hundreds of thousands of lives to take the 6,000 square kilometers of the Donbass that are left. And again, this is the best-case scenario. Ukraine is doing everything that it can in the Donbass to ensure this scenario doesn't come to pass. Beyond the lethality of the front and the kill zones that Ukraine has infested with more drones than Russia can handle, Ukraine has started a campaign of middle-range drone strikes in Donetsk that are shattering Russian supply lines and support systems for its troops on the front. Transport routes on the Donetsk Ring Road and in locations including Horlivka, Andriivka, and Zurez are being hit by Ukraine's latest generation of drones, and these strikes are all designed to slow Russia down even further. The less support the frontline soldiers have, the more of them die for every square kilometer that they take. This is attrition in the 21st century. Ukraine has become a master of it, and it could be the key to liberating the Donbass in the long term. The Jamestown Foundation adds that Ukraine's middle-range drones can strike as deep as 100 kilometers behind the lines. and that Russia is unable to counter these drones effectively due to a lack of air defenses. It's all about whittling away at every layer of the Russian offensive for Ukraine now. The frontline figures may grab the headlines, but it's the degradation of the entire foundation of the Russian offensive in the Donbass that will win the day. And of course, there is still the Fortress Belt. The tiny amounts of progress that Russia has been making in Donetsk have yet to bring it face to face with the fortifications that Ukraine has been building in the Fortress Belt for 12 years, since Putin first launched his campaign of aggression against Ukraine in 2014. Rivers, minefields, tank barriers, bunkers, endless kill zones filled with drones, and the cities that make up the Fortress Belt all have to be passed for Russia to achieve nothing better than a Pyrrhic victory. Here's what Ukraine is really doing. It's setting the stage for Russia to throw everything that it has at the Donbass. That will lead to one of two possible outcomes. First, Russia could do just that, to the point where it destroys its own army to claim the Donbass. That would ruin Putin's plans for the rest of Ukraine, and it would mean that counterattacks by Ukraine could mean that Russia is never truly safe in the territory that it's taken. Or second, Ukraine shatters Russia's assaults to the point where attrition alone prevents Putin's forces from advancing as far as they need to take the Donbass. Then the Ukrainian push back into the region can begin, as Russia loses it all due to Putin's pig-headedness. The next few months are going to tell us a lot about how well Ukraine's strategy will work, especially as the summer sun starts to shine. But right now that strategy looks so solid that Putin's forces can do little more than smash themselves to pieces against it. And don't forget the gains that Ukraine is making elsewhere all take away from the strength of Putin's Donbass offensive. Moscow's forces are stretched as their logistics break down, and with its active defense strategy, Ukraine is shifting the battlefield momentum into its own favor. Find out how by watching our video, and if you enjoyed this video, remember to subscribe to The Military Show so you don't miss any of our analysis of the situation in the Donbass. And thank you as always for watching.